Today we'll be talking about the Ludwig Super Sensitive snare drum here on the Percussion Discussion. In 1926, the reputable drum company Ludwig & Ludwig released a new drum called the Super Ludwig drum that was one of the first workable parallel snare strainer designs that was on the market for consumer use. Now, this line only lasted from 1926 to 1929 before they released a new flagship drum called the Super Sensitive. Now, the Super Sensitive at that time was not really what we know it as today. At that time, the Super Sensitive actually added a snare bed that was directly below the playing head, and so when you played, the snares were quite literally right beneath the surface that you were playing on, hence the super sensitive aspect. However, this caused many problems because at that time, plastic heads didn't really exist. Everybody was playing on calf heads, and so the extra flexibility in those calf heads, a lot of times if you were playing louder on them, the calf head would dip right down and hit the snares, bending your snares and stretching them, and basically rendering them useless. So that design didn't really last in popularity for very long, but before either of these different mechanisms could gain a huge amount of popularity in the drum market, World War II hit. And as many know, the metal market was extremely restricted in World War II, and so companies like Ledy and Ludwig had to resort to building wood shell drums while the use of metal was restricted. So once we got through World War II, not many of the drum companies were doing very well just because there wasn't a huge supply of metal, and also the demand for good drums wasn't very high while a big war was being fought overseas. And so eventually a company by the name of Kahn, they came in and they bought out Ludwig & Ludwig and the Ledy company, and they tried to basically reproduce both lines of snare drums from both of these companies. Now, Kahn was not very successful in doing this because establishing two lines of drums from two completely different companies that built two completely different types of mechanisms and types of drums was not easy. So Kahn completely jumped out of the snare drum business around the 1950s, and they sold Ledy to the Slingerland company, and they sold the Ludwig drum design and name over to WFL, which was actually the company that William F. Ludwig Sr. started after he left the Ludwig & Ludwig company. So WFL took over the Ludwig design, and they immediately started reinstating some of the designs that were being produced before World War II. Now, they definitely did not bring back the super sensitive mechanism from that time, meaning the snare bed that was right below the playing head. That just wasn't popular, it didn't work, so they didn't see any point in bringing that back. However, they did bring two major models back that we do still see today. They brought back what was called the Super Ludwig in the 1950s, and this is what we now know as the Superphonic series, a very, very popular snare drum, a very great sounding snare drum. And they brought back now what we know as the more modern version of the super sensitive snare drum, which is exactly what I have here. Now, the company WFL did not actually stay around for very long. Eventually, Ludwig did get the rights back to his family name and his company name, and so he reinstated the company in 1961 as Ludwig and started producing what we now know as the Superphonic and the Super Sensitive series under his own company name. So about 1961 is where the big production of the super sensitive snare systems came about once again. So we saw the parallel snare design come back, and we saw actually a lot of the old components from the 1920 and 30s production lines being used. They were very big on not wasting a whole lot of product, and so they went back and used the exact same parts that they had used on the 1930s drums in the 1960s. However, they hadn't built a whole lot of it in the 1930s, and so eventually they did have to modernize their production processes and start including new parts, which is where we start to see the evolution of this system take place. But nonetheless, the major performance of the mechanism itself stayed exactly the same, still a parallel strainer design meant to get the most sensitivity out of your drum. Now, as we go into the 1960s and even the 1970s, the super sensitive series actually got into the education market quite heavily. Ludwig was really aiming for schools and small ensemble programs to buy these drums, and so now these days there's thousands of these drums just sitting around in a ton of band closets around the country where Ludwig had sold thousands and thousands of these drums to these programs. But there was one big issue with these drums, and we'll get more into this later in this video. The super sensitive mechanism that is on these drums is extremely sensitive, not only when playing, but also to any damage. And as we know, younger students and kids are not always that careful with equipment. And so very quickly, a lot of these drums were getting broken. And because of the complexity of the mechanism, they weren't getting fixed very often. And so a lot of these drums were put out of service very quickly. Nonetheless, this drum continued in production for quite a few decades. I believe that some sort of this system is still on sale at this time, and the Superphonic series is very much alive and well and still being sold on lots of major retailers. Now, a lot of the, I guess, original secondary super sensitive mechanisms, meaning those that were built 1960s and on, are definitely still in the used markets. I got this one here from an old Guitar Center, and this is a 1971 drum, meaning it's still got most of the original type of design for the parallel snare system. But yeah, so it's still a very relevant design and still very much about in the drum industry. Now, when the Super Ludwig was released in the 1920s and built through the 1930s, there were a lot of different options that you could get with this type of snare. It was a very high-end snare. It was the flagship of the Ludwig and Ludwig company, meaning that they were going to have the most options for it so that professionals could get every ounce of performance out of the drum. So, along with a very complex and very adjustable throw-off system, there were also a lot of different attachments that you could get for the snare drum. One of the big ones was different types of snares. So you could get gut snares. Those were pretty standard with calfskin heads at the time. You could get wire snares, which is what's common on drum set snares even today. And then you could also get kind of a new hybrid at that time, which I believe was it was like a mixture of gut and a mixture of wire snares. And then they were also experimenting with what we now see more as like guitar wire snares, where you have kind of a cable snare. So those were all available options. And also on the gut snares, the mechanisms that you could put onto your drum that included the gut snares, each of the snares were individually tunable, so you could actually change the tension of all of your snares individually and match them so that your sound on your drum was just as you like it. And that was huge at that time. Very few drums had that kind of adjustability, and definitely that customizability was very new on the market, hence why this was the flagship of the Ludwig and Ludwig company at the time. So a big question that you might be having about this drum is how the mechanism actually works. So unlike your typical drum set snare drum or concert snare drum, both sides of your drum are actually moving when you turn the throw on or off. So I'll get a closer up shot of this so you can see it, but essentially there's a pipe that goes right through the center of this drum inside the shell that connects two levers on either side. And when you pull the throw off on this one side here, it's either going to lower both sides of this mechanism, or it's going to bring both sides of this mechanism up and bring the snare in contact to the head. And the whole point of this parallel mechanism is that the snare is always parallel to the bottom head, meaning that, number one, you have an equal contact of the snare and equal pressure of the snare to the head all the way across the head. And it also means that your snares are able to extend past the head, which means that your snares are in contact with your bottom resonant head all the way to the edge of the drum, hence you're super sensitive. So unlike a lot of snare drums and even some older concert drums, you can get a good amount of snare sound even as you're playing very quietly and very close to the edge of your rim. So again, when you go here, well, that's the wrong way. When you turn it off, your snare is still completely parallel to the bottom head. And then when you turn it back on, both of these mechanisms here on the side of the drum are moving up and bringing the snares in contact with the head all the way across the bottom head. Now, this drum was actually built for individuals who want as much flexibility and customizability with their drum as absolutely possible. There are some drummers out there who just want a system that you throw on, has a good snare sound automatically, and you just play. This is not that drum. There are tons of things that you can adjust on this drum, including the tightness of your snare, the level of your snare, the pressure of your snare on the bottom head, and this can all be done on this mechanism down here on the side. So the tightness of your snare, you simply turn this dial. There's one of these dials on both sides, so you can stretch or put the snare back, I guess unstretch your snare, if you will. So that's what that big dial is for. This is your snare throw mechanism. And then there's a small screw down here, and this is on both sides, on both of these levers, that you can undo, and then you're actually able to lower and lift both of these snare mechanisms here individually so that you can level your snare, making sure that it is parallel to your head, and then it can also help you increase or decrease the amount of pressure that your snare is going to place on your bottom head when you do turn the throw on off. That just allows you to have a lot of customizability over the sound of your snare on your super sensitive snare drum. So it's definitely for the audience who wants to go after a very specific sound that they want, not for the audience that is just looking for a snare that they can throw on a stand, turn on, and hope for a good sound. If you are interested in purchasing a Ludwig Super Sensitive snare drum, there are a few things that you definitely want to look at. Now, first is the shell when you're looking at one of these drums. Ludwig and Ludwig, when they made these drums, especially in the 1970s, mainly 1960s, 70s, and even up into the 80s, they did not do a wonderful job at applying the chrome to the shell. So a lot of these drums have a lot of pitting where the chrome is falling off of the drum. It's just not sticking anymore. So definitely keep a lookout if the finish is something that's really important to you. Look for a lot of pitting on the drum, and also know that chrome and pitting is not really something you can repair unless you have the drum completely re-chromed, which is an extremely expensive process and really not worth it. So that's just something to look out for. The drum that I have here, it's 1971 Ludwig. It definitely has some pitting around it, but I was able to clean it up enough that I'm pretty happy with how it looks, and it sounds great to me, so that's all that matters to me. You're also going to see a lot of probably rust and dirt that's built up on the shell over time. For some reason, this type of chrome and metal really likes to gather dust and dirt over time, but this can be cleaned off with a little bit of Brasso and a microfiber cloth. It's not hard to get off, so if it is a dirty shell, don't worry, but if you have a lot of pitting, it's totally up to you if you want to deal with that or not. The second thing is obviously the snare mechanism itself. Now, as we've talked about, it is a very, very fragile mechanism, and a lot of them have been pretty beat up over time. So it's very hard to find parts to repair these mechanisms, and some mechanisms are unrepairable just because certain parts of it are broken or missing that you simply cannot get anymore. So if you're looking at a drum, make sure that you look all through the mechanism, look through all the parts. There's a lot of diagrams online that you can kind of reference to see what you're looking for, and just make sure that everything is there to make sure that you're going to have a actual functional super sensitive mechanism and you're not just buying a dud drum. There are a lot of super sensitive shells that have kind of been retrofitted with some very simple, more modern snare mechanisms just because the original super sensitive mechanisms haven't lasted, but they still wanted to use the shell because it's a really good shell. And then last thing is the snares. Now, you can buy super sensitive snares that fit the 1960s models on. However, you cannot buy the gut snare models for the 1920s and 30s models. So take a look at the conditions of the snares. Obviously, everybody on modern drums, you replace snares every once in a while, so it's likely that some snares on some of these drums are going to be worn out, and they're just not going to sound great when you play. So especially if you're going to buy a pre-World War II era super sensitive or Super Ludwig snare drum as it was called at the time, take a look at the snares, see if number one, they're usable, and number two, if they're not, see if you can replace them. I know shops like Sweetwater and whatnot have models of snares that do fit these models that are in the 1960s and 70s, but I'm not really sure if there's parts around that can replace the snares, especially gut snares and kind of their hybrid snares of the 1920s and 30s, so you may have to retrofit some different types of snares there if you do need to replace what's already there. Hopefully this video has helped you learn a little bit about the Ludwig Super Sensitive series. If you have any questions about the drum, please do leave a comment down below and I will do my best to answer your question to the best of my knowledge. I'm also going to put a few links down in the description for this video that'll take you to some great resources that have a lot of information on these drums and a lot of purchasing resources and restoration resources available so that if you do get interested in getting one of these drums or repairing one of these drums, hopefully that can help you out as well. Thank you for joining me here on the Percussion Discussion. If you have any questions or suggestions, please leave them down in the comments section. And if you're interested in more percussion-related content just like this, go ahead and hit subscribe, and I'll have more content out soon. Take care, and goodbye.